we're going to spend a little more time with Lawrence Hill. Lawrence, I wanted to ask you, Tiger Woods describes himself as Cablination, a word that he made up, but he identifies himself as. It offended some black folks who said he was denying his African-American ancestry. How difficult is it for someone to claim they're mixed race when others want to impose this identity on you?
Well, that's a really interesting question. It's a very political issue. Of course, when you're Tiger Woods, you can pretty well say you're anything you want and pull it off. And I really chortled when I first heard that term, Cablination. It amused me. He has a right to define himself however he wants, in my opinion. On the other hand, there is a real political issue here. And over hundreds of years, people of African descent in Canada and the United States have been judged as black if they were known to have a drop, so to speak, of black blood. And I'm saying that mockingly because I don't believe in the notion of black blood as something that can be arithmetized. But if you're known to have any African ancestry, traditionally, for the purposes of slavery or segregation or social injustice, you're categorized as black. You're not let off the hook if somebody knows that your daddy was white and he raped a woman who was a black slave. You're not let off the hook. You're still enslaved, even though you have a white ancestry too. And so this has been the operating rule for centuries, basically, in North America. And maybe it's shaken a bit and it's beginning to fall apart after the Second World War. But it defined our thinking for a long time. So it's been internalized. So many people of African descent still want to claim that very firmly, that African identity, and feel somewhat betrayed if somebody steps outside the mold and says, no, I'm not just black, or I'm not calling myself African American or African Canadian, I'm Cablination because I'm Tiger Woods. That does tend to tick some people off.
We see that with President Obama, who self-identifies as a black man, but some people will say, well, yes, but he's also half white.
Yes, but I mean, let's face it, if President Obama had grown up in wherever he grew up in the States calling himself white, do you think he could have pulled that off? Never in a million years. Not in this lifetime of ours. So the only viable identity that he could construct for himself was as a black man. Perhaps he could have said he was mixed, but generally that term wouldn't have been in vogue during his childhood as a form of formal identity. Basically, you're black if you're known to have any black ancestry. So there was no other viable way. In my case, too, I felt that the only viable identity for myself growing up as a child of a mixed race marriage was to think of myself as black, because white was impossible. So black, it sort of had to be.
White was impossible for you, or impossible because others wouldn't let you be white?
Well, precisely, because others I couldn't pull that off. I couldn't walk into a hockey team or a chess club or a track club or a schoolroom and call myself white. I would have been called on that. That was not a social possibility. So black it had to be. So we're talking about a social reality here. We're not talking about a biological or an ancestral reality. Everybody knows that Tiger Woods has a mixed ancestry, as does Barack Obama, and so do I. And the case is really how you're identified, not so much who your parents are.
Are there social boundaries you can't cross as a mixed race person?
Well, that depends on the person, and it depends on what they look like and who they are and what their class is. I don't think there's an absolute rule about this. Lots of people have completely passed for white. Anatole Broyard, a very famous critic for the New York Times, had two black parents but passed for white in order to get a job as a literary critic for the New York Times, and he lived his whole life denying his blackness and not even telling his children that he was black. So people pass if they're able to, but how many people can pull that off? You have to be sufficiently white that you can tell somebody that you're white and make them believe it. So it's a very intimate dance, isn't it? It's a social dance. What can you negotiate? What is accepted? It all comes down to negotiation in the public sphere.
If people can identify however they want, self-identify however they want, doesn't the opportunity also exist for people to abuse that privilege?
It does, but I'm not too worried about that. I mean, how many white people are going to go around and call themselves black because they find it advantageous? I mean, that's what? Is that going to be 1 in a million? I'm not too worried about people pretending that they're members of a group that's generally disregarded or sort of downtrodden or disadvantaged. So perhaps there's a person out there who might do that, but I don't think that's going to be threatening our social equilibrium.
What's the takeaway? What's the takeaway from that?
Well, I think the takeaway is that we need to have the courage to accept ourselves as who we are and to accept others as they wish to be and as they are, and not to attempt to tell another person how they are to live or who they are, and not to define for them in your courts or in your legislatures their blood or their identity, but to let them be the person that they are.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.